Hello, team players! So specific familiars are some of the most underutilized features in Pathfinder 2e, but some of them have crazy abilities that can really help your party. But in order to take them, you need a specific number of familiar abilities. Especially the more powerful ones take a lot of them. So while most of these familiars are available to most spellcasters, they are all available to witches. So if you want these familiars, be a witch. You'll either get them way earlier than other spellcasters, or you'll eventually be able to take the ones that are only available to witches because of how many familiar abilities they require. It's especially tough to get these familiars with non-spellcasters. Also, in this video, I will go over the specific familiars in the books, not the adventure paths. If you want those familiars, let me know and I'll do a separate video on those. Let's start with the Aeon Wryd. To take this familiar, you need your familiar to have 3 familiar abilities. This one is very easy for any spellcaster to take. It is guaranteed to have the Construct and Flyer abilities. The third ability can be anything you want it to be. I did a familiars video a while ago. Let me know if you want me to redo that one. As for other special abilities, the unique ones that this familiar has, it can hold 1 Aeon Stone, and you gain that stone's resonance power, in addition to that of any stone that you have in a Wayfinder. The two do not interfere with each other. So you can have 2 resonance powers active, which is pretty cool in my book. However, the Aeon Wryd does not have a land speed, and it has weakness of Sonic equal to your level. Sonic is not a common damage type, but if you're running into enemy bards a lot, this might not be the specific familiar for you. Next we have the Calligraphy Wyrm. It requires 6 familiar abilities. So unless you're a witch, you're going to need to be high level for this one. It always has the Dark Vision, Flyer, Manual Dexterity, Sense, Skill for the Arcane and Society skills, as well as the speech abilities. It also has the ink spray ability. Once per 10 minutes, your familiar can spray ink in a 10-foot cone. This requires a reflex save equal to its master's spell DC or class DC, whichever is higher. On a failure, if the creature was invisible, it is now only concealed for 2 rounds. On a critical failure, this lasts for 1 minute. This is very situational. If you're running into invisible creatures a lot, this might be useful. But you or your familiar have to already know where the creature is to use this effectively. So not that useful, but if you can pull it off, it's a good teamwork option because now everyone knows where they are instead of just you or your familiar. The Ceru requires 4 familiar abilities, so it's available to any spellcaster that has access to a familiar, or even an alchemist with one of the familiar archetypes. It has the Cantrip Connection ability for both Guidance and Mage Hand, as well as Dark Vision and Touch Telepathy. If Guidance and or Mage Hand are not on your spell list, you get to choose a different one for each spell that isn't on your list. It also gains the Turn Fate ability, allowing it to change the fate of 1 creature within 30 feet once per day. You can choose to give the target good or bad fortune. If targeted by bad fortune, the target must make a will save against your class DC or spell DC, whichever is higher. On a failure, the target must roll their attack roll, skill check, or saving throw twice and take the lower results, also known as disadvantage. On a critical failure, this applies to the next 3 attempts. If targeted with good fortune, the target rolls twice and takes the higher result on their next attack roll, skill check, or saving throw, also known as advantage. This familiar is absolutely insane. Giving advantage or disadvantage on a roll once per day is huge, especially in a system where this kind of thing isn't common at all. This one should definitely be considered if you can get enough familiar abilities for it. The Clockwork Familiar requires 3 familiar abilities. It has the Dark Vision familiar ability automatically. The other 2 abilities you get to choose. However, it has the Clockwork ability, meaning you have to wind it for it to work. This lasts for 24 hours. Also, enemies can disable it with a Disable Device check, which is under Thievery, to reduce its operating time by 1 hour, or 2 hours if you get a critical success. It also is affected by anything that affects technology. It has the Constructed ability, making it immune to everything that a construct is immune to, such as death effects and the sickened condition. However, It can only regain hit points if you repair it, and it has a weakness to electricity equal to your level. It also has the Steam Screen ability. Once per minute, it can gain a bonus to intimidation checks, and give concealment to any creature in its space. However, the creature cannot use this concealment to hide or sneak. And finally, it has the Toggle Standby Mode ability. It can go into standby mode, which doesn't decrease its operational time. While in this mode, it is aware of its surroundings, but it cannot act except to exit standby mode. It requires 2 action to enter or exit this mode. This familiar has a lot of abilities, but it's just okay. Honestly, a lot of it is just the upsides and downsides of having a familiar that's a construct. The other stuff isn't incredibly useful in my opinion. The Crawling Hand needs 5 familiar abilities. It has the Manual Dexterity, Spell Delivery, and Valet abilities. It also has the Lend a Hand ability, allowing it to gain 1 reaction per round even though it's a minion. It can use that reaction to aid an attack roll made by an ally in its space, and it automatically succeeds. If it has another ability that gives it a reaction, it still only gets 1 reaction per round and must choose how to use it. It is also an undead creature, meaning it has negative healing and is immune to death effects, disease, poison, and the unconscious condition. It is, however, destroyed at 0 HP. Then there's the Crysmal Shardling, which requires 3 familiar abilities. It automatically has the Burrower, Elemental, Earth Only, and Speech abilities. It also has the Crystal Scent ability, allowing it to find crystals or gems within 60 feet as if using the Scent ability. The Elemental Scamp familiar requires 5 familiar abilities, and it has the Elemental, Flyer, and Speech abilities. Your familiar also gets a breath weapon in a 10-foot cone that does damage based on the type of Scamp, which can be any element between air, earth, fire, metal, water, and wood. Your familiar also gets an extra familiar ability based on its elemental type with the Elemental Motion ability, such as Flyer for air and Climber for wood. The Elemental Wisp familiar, on the other hand, requires 3 familiar abilities. It automatically gains the Accompanist, Elemental, and Speech abilities. It also has the same Elemental Motion ability that I just talked about with the Elemental Scamp. You must also select an element that your Wisp is, and you cannot change it. And finally, it has the Resonance ability, so all your alchemical items and magic effects with the same element as your Wisp get a damage bonus. If your Wisp is a Wood Wisp, this applies to effects with the plant trait as well. Now let's talk about the Fey Draconet, which used to be known as the Fairy Dragon. This one requires 5 familiar abilities. It gains the Dark Vision, Flyer, Manual Dexterity, Speech, and Touch Telepathy abilities. It also has a breath weapon that causes the Stupefied 2 and Slowed 1 conditions. It's a 10-foot cone and requires a Fortitude save. On a failure, it lasts for 1d4 rounds. On a critical failure, it lasts for 1 minute. Stupefied is a really good condition to use against spellcasters, and Slowed 1 is amazing against any enemy. You do have to be careful with this though, because it does affect all creatures in the cone, so you can hit your allies with this, which isn't very good. Next we have the Gennyan. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It requires 5 familiar abilities, and it gains the Elemental and Speech abilities, as well as the Elemental Motion ability that I've talked about for all the Elemental familiars. As a minor genie, it also gains the Little Wish ability, allowing it 1 creature it can see within 60 feet to reroll a saving throw or a skill check. And finally, it has the Elemental Diplomat ability. So, it has a bonus on diplomacy checks against other elementals, and grants you the same bonus if it's in your space. Next we have a pretty new one with the Grindle Drake. It requires 4 familiar abilities. It has the Dark Vision and skilled abilities for Perception and Survival, plus the Touch Telepathy ability. It also has the Forge ability, allowing it to, once per 10 minutes, restore its hit points up to half your level. It also has the Sure and Steady ability, allowing it to gain knowledge about the ground or stone flooring under its feet in a 10-foot emanation. This knowledge can include whether the ground is enchanted, treacherous, or otherwise different than it appears. It can communicate this information to you with its touch telepathy. The Imp requires a whopping 7 familiar abilities. This is one you're definitely not going to get unless you're a witch. It has the Dark Vision, Flyer, Manual Dexterity, Resistance Poison, Skill, Deception, Speech, and Touch Telepathy abilities. The Imp can also offer a non-fiend within 15 feet a bargain. The bargain lasts for 1 hour once accepted. For that 1 hour, the creature can reroll an attack roll or saving throw and use the higher result. However, if the creature dies while the bargain is active, the Imp decides where its soul goes. This typically sends the soul to the Imp's home plane for eternity, and the creature can't be resurrected except by wish or similarly powerful magic. In addition, once per hour, the Imp can cast invisibility on itself. The Homunculus Familiar is great for alchemists, but it's hard for them to get. It requires 6 familiar abilities, which means you need a familiar archetype, more than likely, to take this one for an alchemist. It automatically has the Dark Vision, Construct, Manual Dexterity, and Poison Reservoir abilities. It also has the Bloodlink ability, allowing it to share information at a range of 1,500 feet, including everything the Master knows, as well as what the Familiar sees. In addition, if the Master becomes unconscious and dying, the Familiar can act on the next turn, even if the Master didn't command it. However, if this Familiar is destroyed, its Master takes mental damage. And finally, you can choose whether this Familiar has the Item Delivery or the Valet abilities. Very, very good for alchemists. Highly recommended for them if you can get enough familiar abilities for them. The Kinnars requires 6 familiar abilities. It has the Dark Vision, Independent, Lifelink, Manual Dexterity, and Speech abilities. Its special abilities from being a specific familiar are 1. Dazzling Show. Once per minute, it can dazzle all creatures in a 30-foot emanation with a will save. 2. Soul Bond. Although they are 2 creatures, they function as a single familiar. However, if they are targeted by a mental effect, they get to roll twice and take the better result. And finally, 3. Vina Song. Once per hour, the Kinnars can sing to fascinate all creatures in a 30-foot emanation, requiring a will save. The Kinnars can continue the song on the next round to require another will save or be fascinated for another round. However, once the Kinnars stop singing, they cannot do so again for 1 hour. Creatures that make their will save or break the fascination are immune to this effect for 24 hours. Other Kinnars are also immune to this ability. You also have access to the Lantern Wisp Familiar if your familiar has 6 familiar abilities. It has the Construct, Flyer, Kindling, Resistance to Fire and Cold, and Tough abilities. It also has the Stunning Flare ability. Once per 10 minutes, each creature in a 15-foot emanation becomes blinded for 1 round and then dazzled for 2 rounds after, which requires a Fortitude save. The Makluk Wayang requires an insane 8 familiar abilities. It automatically has the Construct, Manual Dexterity, Play Dead, Speech, Tough, and Versatile Form abilities. With its Channel Projection ability, it has 10-foot more reach with non-hostile interact actions than normal until the end of its turn if it spends 1 action. I honestly don't think this is worth 8 familiar abilities, to be honest with you. I think you're much better off picking a different familiar. The Mockingfey is next. It requires 4 familiar abilities and has the Flyer, Independent, and Speech abilities. It has the Guide ability, allowing it to create an illusion of a creature within 60 feet. The creature targeted must make a will save or become off guard. This lasts until the beginning of your next turn on a failure and until the end of your next turn on a critical failure. I like this one because even if they just fail to save, they're off guard to everyone but you, and they're off guard to you on a critical failure. Works great with spellcasters since you can combine it with status penalties, because off guard is a circumstance penalty. The Mood Cloud is another elemental familiar. It requires 3 familiar abilities and has the Elemental Air and Flyer abilities. With its emote ability, its expression changes once per round, and it can aid you on a check associated with its expression. Deception for an inscrutable expression, Diplomacy for a friendly expression, and Intimidation for an angry expression. It gains a reaction for this and automatically succeeds or automatically critically succeeds if you're a master in the skill in question. Can be very good out of combat and even in combat if you have Bon Mot, because then you can use it in combat no matter what expression it has. Next is the Nosoi, which requires 5 familiar abilities. It has the Dark Vision, Flyer, Manual Dexterity, and Speech abilities. It also has the Haunting Melody ability, forcing all living and undead creatures in a 60-foot emanation to make a will save or be fascinated. And it can use another 2 actions to force the target to make another save or be fascinated for another round. This does work on mindless undead, but not psychopomps. Not great in combat, but can be useful outside of it. Now let's talk about the Old Friend. It requires 4 familiar abilities and has the Flyer ability. It also is incorporeal, so it can't attempt strength-based checks against corporeal creatures. It also can't travel more than 60 feet from its anchor, which would be an item that you have. It also doesn't have the resistance to all damage or immunity to precision damage that other incorporeal creatures have. It is an undead creature, so it has negative healing as well as immunity to death effects, diseases, poisons, and the unconscious condition. Also, it can cast invisibility on itself once per hour. While this is a cool familiar, it's not as good as it could be. I don't recommend this one. The Pipefox requires 5 familiar abilities. It automatically has the Climber, Dark Vision, Second Opinion, the Skilled ability for any skill, and the Speech abilities. It also understands all languages you know, not just one, as well as one common language you don't know. This one would be insane on bars and rogues, since you can always talk to it. And you can even understand an extra language, since it can tell you what they're saying if it's a common language that it knows and you do not. The Polong is another incorporeal undead familiar that requires 8 familiar abilities. It has the Flyer, Lifelink, Skilled Society, Speech, and Spellcasting abilities. It has the same anchored incorporeal ability as other incorporeal undead spellcasters, except that its anchor must be a bottle of some kind. It also has the same undead ability as other undead familiars. Its unique ability is Polong Possession, meaning it can possess a creature, causing it to become drained 1. While possessing a creature, it can ignore its distance and line of effect from its anchored incorporeal ability. It returns to its bottle automatically when the possession ends, even if it's out of range. I can definitely see why this one requires 8 familiar abilities, because drained is extremely rare and also very good to put on enemies, since it lowers their max HP and their fortitude saves. The Shadow Familiar has an access requirement. You must have the Shadowcaster archetype to take this familiar. It requires 7 familiar abilities. It automatically has the Dark Vision, Manual Dexterity, Master's Form, Resistance, Cold and Negative, and Shadow Step abilities. It can also become Shadow for 1 action, giving it resistance to all damage, except force, but not allowing it to use any actions that require a physical form. It can return to its original form by using this action again. It can also hide or end a sneak action in a creature or object's shadow. It can also make an attack with an attack modifier equal to your spell attack roll. On a hit, the target is enfeebled 1 and its shadow disappears. This effect ends after 24 hours. Anything that removes the enfeebled condition also restores their shadow. This familiar can be very good for shadowcasters, especially against strength-based enemies. The Shikigami familiar requires 6 familiar abilities. It has the Construct, Flyer, Kindling, Play Dead, Tough, and Versatile Form abilities. It can also flatten itself, allowing it to go through spaces that a sheet of paper could go through without having to squeeze. In addition, if it dies, you can rebind its spirit to another sheet of paper during your daily preparations. Also during daily preparations, you can inscribe a symbol that corresponds to any element. If you do so, the familiar's kindling ability applies to that type of magic rather than fire. This can be really good if you want some extra damage to any elemental spell at the cost of your familiar for the day. Also, if you give it manual dexterity as well, this familiar can be extremely useful outside of combat. You can also get a Spellslime familiar. It requires 4 familiar abilities, and you must be able to cast spells from spell slots. In other words, you gotta be some kind of spellcaster to take this one. It has the Climber, Dark Vision, and Tough abilities. It can smell magic with the same magical tradition as your own, with an imprecise sense with a range of 30 feet. It is also immune to critical hits and precision damage, but only has an AC of 10 plus your level, instead of your own AC. And finally, it has the Focus Rejuvenation familiar ability, except it recovers 2 hit points per level instead of 1. Can be pretty useful if you're a spellcaster. Now we have the final undead familiar, the Talking Head. It requires 3 familiar abilities and has the Cantrip Connection, the skill ability for any of the following: Arcana, Occultism, or one type of lore, and speech abilities. It also has the undead ability that all undead familiars have. But unless it has the flyer ability, it can only move by rolling on the ground, which reduces its speed to 15 feet. In addition, any creature can kick or throw the head as a single action with a range of 30 feet. However, this cannot be used as an attack. The head bounces harmlessly off of anything it hits. If you want a familiar that helps with recall knowledge, this is probably the one you want. It can also help you with cantrips, so this one can be very good. And then we have the Tapir Sage. It requires 6 familiar abilities. It has the Dark Vision, Kin Speech, Toolbearer, and Valet familiar abilities. It can also spend 10 minutes brewing tea. It must spend the entire time brewing the tea or it's ruined. Once brewed, the familiar can serve 2 cups with each action I'm about to talk about. One with an adjacent creature and one with itself. Each requires 2 actions, and the 3 infusions must be done in order. The tea lasts for 1 hour before losing its power. The first infusion heals the target for 1d8 times your level and grants a +4 on the next saving throw against a disease or poison in the next 24 hours. The second infusion offers half that benefit. The third infusion only gives temporary hit points for 1 hour. This can be very good out of combat healing, even with the third infusion. Since your party is going to be spending 10 minutes refocusing and doing medicine checks anyway, might as well have your familiar also do this. If you guys enjoyed this video, you may like the video on screen. And make sure you check out the description below for other ways to support me as a creator. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.